Hey guys, tonight we step through a weathered stone gateway into a world where the air is heavy with the scent of jasmine. Lilies float across perfectly still pools, and towering date palms cast long shadows over winding paths. Water whispers through narrow channels carved by hands that disappeared thousands of years ago, while birds sing from branches that seem to belong to another age entirely. It looks peaceful enough to stay forever, although you probably won't survive this if you're expecting neatly labeled flower beds and garden center signs every 20 feet. Ancient gardeners had a rather different approach to landscaping. Some plants could heal you, some could feed you, and a few might politely remind you that not every leaf is your friend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know where you're listening from and what your local time is. It's always fascinating to imagine this quiet evening journey stretching across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pause just inside the garden gate. Immediately, the outside world begins to fade. Behind you lies the noise of streets, markets, workshops, and busy lives. Ahead, everything slows. Gravel crunches softly beneath your sandals. Warm sunlight filters through broad leaves overhead, creating shifting patches of light and shadow that dance across the path. Even the air feels different, cooler, softer, as though the garden has quietly decided that haste simply isn't welcome here. One of the most remarkable historical facts about ancient civilizations is that gardens were rarely created only for decoration. In places such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, Greece, Rome, and China, gardens often combined beauty with practical purpose. They produced fruit, herbs, flowers, medicines, shade, fresh water, and peaceful spaces for reflection, all at once. Beauty and usefulness happily shared the same soil. You continue walking. The path curves gently instead of running straight. That seems intentional. Ancient designers understood something modern parks often rediscover, that curiosity grows stronger when you cannot see everything at once. Around every bend waits another surprise, perhaps a quiet pond, perhaps a flowering tree, perhaps an extremely confident goose. You make a mental note never to underestimate geese. History has produced kings, conquerors, philosophers, and architects. A determined goose remains surprisingly intimidating. The morning breeze stirs fragrant blossoms growing along low stone walls. Some scents are sweet enough to notice immediately. Others linger more quietly, revealing themselves only as you slow your pace. Without realizing it, you begin breathing more deeply. Gardens seem to encourage that. Historians still argue whether many ancient royal gardens were designed primarily as symbols of political power or as genuine places of relaxation for their owners. Perhaps they served both purposes. After all, creating an oasis in a harsh landscape demonstrated wealth, engineering skill, and careful planning, while also offering welcome relief from heat and dust. Power can be impressive. Shade on a scorching afternoon may be even more impressive. A gardener kneels beside a narrow channel of flowing water. He carefully clears away fallen leaves so the current continues uninterrupted. It looks like a simple task, yet without constant attention, the entire garden would slowly change. Pools would become stagnant, plants would struggle, flowers would fade. You begin realizing something important. The garden isn't frozen in time, it is alive. Every sunrise changes it, every season reshapes it. Every gardener quietly collaborates with nature rather than commanding it. Nearby, another worker gently trims a vine climbing across a wooden trellis. The movement is slow and deliberate. No rushing, no dramatic gestures, only years of experience guiding careful hands. Modern gardening often promises quick results. Ancient gardening demanded patience, sometimes extraordinary patience. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that some ancient Egyptian gardens included carefully trained sycamore fig trees whose branches were encouraged to grow into pleasing shapes over many years. Imagine beginning a project knowing that someone else might enjoy its full beauty generations after you're gone. That is optimism on a remarkable scale. A pair of small birds lands beside the pathway. They hop confidently between tiny patches of sunlight, completely unbothered by your presence. Apparently, this is their garden too. You smile. The birds seem unimpressed. They continue searching for insects with admirable professionalism. Farther ahead, water begins to sparkle through the leaves. You soon reach a long, reflecting pool stretching towards a small pavilion. The surface is almost perfectly still. Only the occasional ripple betrays the movement of tiny fish beneath. Without modern pumps or decorative lighting, the pool possesses a quiet elegance. Its greatest decoration is the sky itself. Clouds drift slowly across the water. Palm trees sway upside down in the reflection. For a brief moment, you're not entirely sure where the garden ends and the sky begins. Someone has scattered flower petals across the edge of the pool, not because anyone demanded it, simply because it looked beautiful. That thought follows you as you continue walking. Throughout history, people have devoted astonishing effort to creating places that served no urgent practical necessity beyond making life a little more pleasant. That seems deeply human. Nearby, children chase butterflies across a sunny patch of grass. One proudly announces that today's butterfly is much faster than yesterday's. Another insists the butterfly is exactly the same one. The butterfly offers no opinion. It appears too busy being a butterfly. The gardeners laugh softly without interrupting their work. Beauty, it seems, is meant to be shared rather than protected behind invisible ropes. The path leads beneath an arbor draped with climbing vines. Tiny blossoms hang overhead like natural lanterns. The shade beneath them feels wonderfully cool. You stop for a moment. Nothing demands your attention. Nobody expects anything from you. The only sounds are birdsong, distant water, and leaves whispering together in the breeze. It occurs to you that perhaps this was always one of the garden's greatest purposes, not simply growing plants, growing peace. As the morning sun climbs higher into the sky, you notice larger trees appearing beyond the next winding path. Their broad canopies promise deeper shade, richer fragrances, and older stories. Somewhere among those trees, the first great river civilization has already begun shaping gardens unlike anything the world has seen before. The Nile is waiting.
The garden path gradually widens as you leave the smaller grove behind. The air grows warmer, not unpleasantly warm, but the kind of heat that gently reminds you the desert is never very far away. Ahead, tall date palms sway lazily against a brilliant blue sky, while beyond them, a ribbon of shimmering water catches the morning light. The Nile. Without it, this landscape would be almost unrecognizable. With it, an entire civilization blooms. You walk toward the river, and almost immediately the sounds begin to change. Birds call from reeds along the water's edge. Frogs croak somewhere among clusters of papyrus. A soft breeze carries the scent of damp earth, lotus blossoms, and freshly watered soil. The contrast is astonishing. Golden desert stretches beyond the horizon, yet here, life gathers in every shade of green imaginable. One of the most well-established historical facts is that ancient Egyptian gardens depended entirely upon the annual flooding of the Nile. The Nile deposited rich black silt across the land, allowing gardeners to cultivate fruit trees, vegetables, flowers, and medicinal plants that would have struggled in the surrounding desert. The Nile wasn't merely helpful, it was everything. You step through a low stone gateway into what appears to be the garden of an important official. Its layout is remarkably orderly. Straight paths divide carefully tended beds. Rows of sycamore figs provide welcome shade. Palm trees stand like patient guardians. At the center lies a long rectangular pool filled with blooming blue and white lotus flowers. Even from several steps away, the water reflects the sky with almost impossible clarity. You pause beside it. Tiny fish dart between stems beneath the floating blossoms. Dragonflies skim the surface with effortless grace. Somewhere nearby, a duck lands rather dramatically, creating ripples that travel across the pool before slowly fading away. The duck seems enormously pleased with itself. No audience applauds. It appears unconcerned. Ancient confidence truly is admirable. Garden workers move quietly around you. One waters young shrubs using a clay jar balanced carefully on his shoulder. Another gently loosens soil around a pomegranate tree. A third gathers herbs into woven baskets destined for the household kitchens. Nothing is hurried. Gardening here follows the rhythm of seasons rather than schedules. You notice something remarkable. Almost every plant serves more than one purpose. A fig tree offers fruit. Its shade cools the ground beneath. Its branches shelter birds. Its roots help stabilize the soil. Beauty and practicality remain perfect companions. Historians still argue whether the most elaborate Egyptian palace gardens were intended primarily for religious symbolism or as peaceful retreats from the demands of court life. The evidence suggests they may have been both sacred and personal spaces, where rulers displayed power while also enjoying moments of quiet reflection. After all, even a pharaoh probably appreciated sitting in the shade after a particularly busy morning of running an empire. Nearby, the unmistakable fragrance of jasmine drifts through the air. It mingles with the sweeter scent of flowering acacias and the earthy freshness rising from damp irrigation channels. The entire garden seems carefully designed not only to please the eye, but also the nose. You breathe deeply. Modern perfumes often attempt to imitate these natural fragrances. Ancient gardeners simply grew the originals. A gardener smiles as he notices your curiosity. He gestures proudly towards several lotus flowers floating upon the pool. The lotus held profound symbolic importance throughout ancient Egypt, representing rebirth, renewal, and the rising sun. Each morning, the blossoms opened with daylight and closed again as evening approached, making them powerful symbols in Egyptian art and religion. You watch one blossom gently sway upon the water. It is surprisingly calming. No wonder artists painted them so often. Nearby stands a cluster of papyrus plants reaching confidently towards the sky. Most people remember papyrus as the writing material of ancient Egypt, yet living papyrus is every bit as beautiful as the scrolls it eventually becomes. Its delicate green crowns sway with every breeze, like tiny fireworks frozen in time. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that wealthy Egyptians occasionally stocked ornamental pools with colorful fish simply because watching them glide beneath the water brought pleasure and tranquility. It turns out, people have been peacefully staring at fish for thousands of years. Aquariums simply arrived a little later. Children wander into the garden, carrying small baskets. Their task appears straightforward: gather fallen dates beneath the palms. Within minutes, however, one child becomes completely distracted by a brilliantly colored butterfly. The dates temporarily lose the competition. Priorities shift quickly when butterflies are involved. The supervising gardener chuckles but says nothing. Perhaps he remembered doing exactly the same thing. The farther you walk, the more you notice small shrines tucked discreetly among the trees. Simple offerings of flowers rest beside carved stone figures. These quiet corners remind you that gardens were not merely places of work. They also invited gratitude. The cycle of planting, watering, blooming, harvesting, and beginning again reflected larger rhythms people saw throughout nature itself. Everything returned. Floods, seasons, sunrise, flowers, life. A gentle breeze ripples across the reflecting pool once more. For a brief moment, the mirrored image of the palms breaks apart into shimmering fragments before slowly becoming whole again. The scene feels almost dreamlike. You understand why painters, poets, and priests all found inspiration here. Nature, arranged with care, has a remarkable ability to quiet the mind. As afternoon approaches, gardeners begin drawing more water from the nearby canals. Simple devices help lift the precious river water into channels feeding every corner of the grounds. Without constant attention, the garden would slowly surrender to the desert waiting patiently beyond its walls. Every green leaf here represents countless hours of careful labor. You leave the garden through another shaded gate. Behind you, birds continue singing among the sycamores. Ahead lies a road stretching eastward across distant lands. Travelers speak of another kingdom where gardens become even grander, where high walls protect flowing water, where symmetry itself becomes an art, where paradise is carefully designed upon the earth. The road to ancient Persia has already begun beneath your feet.
The dusty road carries you farther from the green banks of the Nile, across wide landscapes where the sun hangs high above rugged hills and endless plains. Days pass gently. Caravans appear now and then, their camels moving with the calm confidence of creatures who have absolutely no intention of hurrying for anyone. Bells tied around their necks create a soft rhythm that drifts through the warm air. You begin to understand why ancient travelers became such patient people. When the journey itself lasts weeks, there is very little point in checking whether you've arrived every 5 minutes. Eventually, something extraordinary appears on the horizon. High stone walls. They seem almost out of place in the open landscape. At first glance, they resemble the defenses of a great fortress. But as you draw closer, the breeze carries an unexpected fragrance. Roses, cypress, fresh water. Behind those walls lies no military stronghold. A garden waits. One of the best-known historical facts is that the ancient Persians developed some of the world's most influential formal garden designs. Their enclosed gardens, known by a word that eventually gave rise to our modern word paradise, were carefully planned spaces where trees, flowers, flowing water, and shade created an oasis against the harsh surrounding climate. Paradise, it turns out, originally had walls. You step through an elaborately carved wooden gate. The change is immediate. Outside, dry winds sweep across the plain. Inside, cool air greets you like an old friend. Tall cypress trees line perfectly straight pathways. Fruit trees spread their branches across neat orchards. Flower beds overflow with brilliant colors, arranged so carefully that even the blossoms seem to know exactly where they belong. Everything appears balanced. Nothing feels accidental. You pause at the center of the garden. 4 narrow water channels stretch outward in perfect symmetry, dividing the landscape into equal sections. Crystal clear water glides silently along polished stone, catching flashes of sunlight as it moves. The gentle sound follows you wherever you walk, not loud enough to interrupt conversation, just enough to soften the silence. The effect is remarkably calming. Modern designers still borrow this idea because, well, it works. Some inventions simply refuse to become outdated. A gardener notices your fascination. He smiles proudly before kneeling beside one of the channels. With practiced hands, he removes a single fallen leaf from the flowing water. Within moments, the tiny current resumes its flawless journey. Such a small task, such an important one. Without careful maintenance, the entire harmony of the garden would gradually disappear. You begin realizing that perfection often depends upon countless tiny acts of quiet attention. Historians still argue whether Persian gardens were intended mainly to symbolize earthly power or to represent an ideal vision of the afterlife described in religious traditions. The orderly layout, abundant water, and lush vegetation likely carried both political and spiritual meaning.
Sometimes beauty speaks several languages at once. You continue along one shaded avenue where roses bloom beside lavender and fragrant herbs. Their scents mingle gently in the afternoon air. Bees move lazily between blossoms with impressive dedication. One bee appears particularly determined to inspect every single flower. You admire its work ethic. You do not volunteer to assist. The path leads toward a marble pavilion overlooking a broad reflecting pool. Its surface is so perfectly still that the surrounding trees seem to grow downward into another world beneath the water. A breeze briefly disturbs the reflection, then calm returns. You find yourself standing perfectly still, not because anyone instructed you to, because the garden quietly encourages stillness. Nearby, servants spread woven carpets beneath the shade of flowering trees. Fresh fruit appears in polished bowls: figs, pomegranates, grapes, apricots, everything arranged with the same careful balance found throughout the garden itself. Even lunch seems symmetrical. Somewhere, an architect is undoubtedly very pleased. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that Persian rulers occasionally imported rare plants from distant regions simply to expand the variety growing within their gardens. Long before botanical gardens became common, these royal landscapes served as living collections of unusual species gathered from across vast empires. Plant collecting, it seems, has impressively ancient roots. A group of musicians quietly begins playing beneath another pavilion. Soft melodies drift across the water without overwhelming the peaceful atmosphere. Unlike the lively dances you encountered in village festivals, this music seems designed to accompany conversation rather than compete with it. You stroll beneath towering plane trees whose enormous canopies create islands of cool shade. The temperature changes noticeably with every step. Outside the walls, the afternoon sun remains relentless. Inside, the air feels almost gentle. You suddenly appreciate why shade was considered one of the greatest luxuries in much of the ancient world. Air conditioning had not yet entered history. Trees handled the assignment instead. Children chase one another along winding paths before being gently reminded not to run too close to the reflecting pools. One little boy stops suddenly to watch a dragonfly hovering over the water. Its shimmering wings catch the sunlight like tiny pieces of glass. He remains completely fascinated. You quietly join him. Some entertainments require no explanation. The farther you wander, the more you notice birds nesting safely among the branches. Bright finches, graceful doves, tiny songbirds whose cheerful melodies blend effortlessly with the flowing water. The garden belongs to them as much as anyone. Its designers seem perfectly content to share. As evening approaches, the sunlight softens into warm gold. Long shadows stretch gracefully across the paths. The cypress trees become elegant silhouettes against the glowing sky. The fountains continue whispering their endless conversations with gravity. Nothing here feels rushed. Time itself seems to slow. You begin understanding why later civilizations admired these gardens so deeply. Their influence would spread across continents, inspiring countless landscapes for centuries to come. Yet your own journey continues. Beyond these peaceful walls lies an even older land, where mighty rivers once nourished cities so ancient they seemed already legendary to later generations. There, between the Tigris and Euphrates, another hidden world of gardens is quietly waiting.
The cool shade of the Persian garden lingers pleasantly in your memory as the road stretches east and west across a vast landscape shaped by rivers older than nearly every story you've ever heard. Ahead lies the land the ancient Greeks would later call Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. The very name sounds peaceful. The reality is rather more complicated. Two mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, wander across broad plains, sometimes bringing life, sometimes bringing floods.
and occasionally reminding everyone that nature has absolutely no interest in sticking to anyone's schedule. Fortunately, human beings are wonderfully stubborn. Where rivers wandered, people learned to guide them. Where deserts threatened, people planted gardens anyway. One of the most important historical facts about ancient Mesopotamia is that irrigation canals allowed cities such as Ur, Babylon, and Nineveh to support agriculture and ornamental gardens in regions that would otherwise have remained dry. These engineering systems were among humanity's earliest large-scale efforts to reshape landscapes for cultivation. Without canals, many gardens would simply never have existed. You follow one such canal now. Its water glides steadily between raised banks lined with reeds gently swaying in the breeze. Workers inspect small wooden gates controlling the flow. A tiny adjustment here, a careful opening there. Water quietly changes direction. Nothing dramatic, yet an entire orchard depends on those simple movements. You begin appreciating irrigation in the same way people appreciate good plumbing. Nobody celebrates it very often until it stops working. Beyond the canal, rows of fruit trees spread toward the horizon. Figs, dates, pomegranates, apples. Their branches hang heavy beneath the afternoon sun. Gardeners move patiently among them, checking leaves, gathering ripe fruit, and brushing dust from delicate blossoms. Each tree appears carefully spaced. Each receives its fair share of precious water. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. The farther you walk, the more impressive the landscape becomes. You approach the outskirts of a great city. Its walls rise high above the plain, built from countless sun-dried bricks glowing softly beneath the sunlight. Beyond those walls waits one of history's greatest centers of civilization, and somewhere inside, gardens. You pass through a towering gateway decorated with brilliantly colored glazed bricks. Images of lions, bulls, and dragons watch silently as travelers enter. The streets hum with merchants, potters, scribes, and craftsmen. Yet even amid the busy city, patches of greenery appear unexpectedly. Courtyards shelter palms, vines climb shaded walls, small pools sparkle behind elegant homes. Nature quietly accompanies city life instead of surrendering to it. Historians still argue whether some of Mesopotamia's most famous gardens, especially those associated with Babylon, existed exactly as later writers described, or whether generations of storytellers gradually transformed impressive landscapes into legendary wonders. The truth remains wonderfully mysterious. You continue toward the royal district. Here, the gardens become larger, far larger. Stone walkways wind through carefully arranged groves. Flowering shrubs border peaceful pools. Tall cedars cast deep shadows across broad lawns. Everywhere you look, water appears, sometimes flowing, sometimes resting quietly, always precious. A gardener carefully prunes a flowering bush with astonishing precision. Each branch seems thoughtfully considered before being trimmed. You ask yourself how long such work must take. The answer is probably longer than your average online tutorial. Ancient patience deserves considerable respect. One quirky historical tidbit concerns the famous hanging gardens often associated with Babylon. Although their exact location remains uncertain, some scholars have suggested ingenious water-lifting systems may have raised river water onto elevated terraces using chains of buckets or early mechanical devices. Imagine being the engineer asked to build a mountain that also needed watering. No pressure. Nearby, several young apprentices carry woven baskets filled with rich soil. An older gardener shows them exactly where each new sapling should be planted. Not too close, not too far. Future generations will enjoy the shade. Planning a garden often means thinking decades ahead. Children play quietly beneath mature date palms planted long before they were born. One little girl gathers fallen blossoms into tiny bouquets. Her younger brother attempts the same. Unfortunately, he becomes distracted by a very determined beetle crossing the pathway. The beetle appears completely focused on its mission. Nobody knows the mission. Everyone respectfully allows it to continue. The scent of cedar drifts through the warm afternoon air. Somewhere nearby, herbs release their fragrance as gardeners brush gently past them. Mint, coriander, perhaps thyme. The aromas blend naturally, creating an atmosphere that feels both cultivated and wonderfully wild. You stop beside a long, reflecting basin. Unlike the Persian garden's perfect symmetry, this one feels slightly more organic. Trees lean naturally toward the water. Reeds soften the edges. Birds land freely wherever they please. Human design and nature seem to have reached a comfortable agreement. Neither completely controls the other. As the afternoon continues, noble visitors stroll slowly through shaded paths. They speak quietly, pause often, occasionally stop simply to admire a blooming flower or the play of sunlight upon the water. You realize gardens encouraged a slower style of conversation. Walking naturally left room for thought. No one hurried toward the next appointment. The garden itself became the destination. Beyond one grove stands a collection of unusual trees brought from distant provinces. Gardeners proudly explain where each one originated. Some traveled hundreds of miles. Others crossed mountains. Still others arrived aboard merchant caravans. These living collections quietly displayed the reach of great kingdoms. Power could be measured not only by armies, but by orchards. As evening approaches, shadows lengthen across the pathways. The canals continue carrying life through every corner of the landscape. Without them, these gardens would gradually disappear beneath dust and sun. With them, an entire civilization blossoms. You leave the city gates just as the sky begins glowing amber. Ahead, rocky hills rise beyond the fertile plains. Olive trees dot their slopes. White marble temples catch the fading sunlight. The philosophers, poets, and sacred groves of ancient Greece are waiting just beyond tomorrow's dawn. Morning arrives with a cool breeze drifting across the hills. The broad river plains of Mesopotamia slowly fade behind you, replaced by rocky paths winding through landscapes that seem shaped as much by sunlight as by stone. Low shrubs cling stubbornly to the hillsides. Wildflowers peek from cracks in weathered rocks. Above, the sky stretches so brilliantly blue that it almost seems polished. Ahead lies ancient Greece. It doesn't greet you with towering walls or endless canals. Instead, it welcomes you with olive trees, thousands of them. Their silver-green leaves shimmer gently whenever the breeze passes through, creating a soft whisper that follows you along the path. You pause beneath one particularly ancient tree. Its trunk twists and bends in remarkable ways, shaped by centuries of slow growth. It almost looks alive in a different sense, as though it remembers. One of the best established historical facts is that olive trees formed one of the foundations of ancient Greek life. They supplied oil for cooking, lighting, religious ceremonies, cosmetics, athletics, and trade. Some olive groves survived for generations, becoming treasured parts of both family life and the wider landscape. Plant a tree today, feed your grandchildren. Ancient Greece understood that lesson remarkably well. The path continues toward a quiet grove where tall cypress, laurel, and oak trees create patches of welcome shade. Unlike the carefully symmetrical Persian gardens or the geometric layouts of Egyptian estates, this place feels almost untouched. Almost. You quickly notice small stone benches positioned beneath the largest trees. A narrow footpath has been swept clean. Someone has placed fresh flowers beside a simple altar. Nature has clearly been encouraged rather than controlled. The grove breathes easily. You lower your voice without quite knowing why. It simply feels appropriate. Many sacred groves throughout Greece were believed to belong to particular gods or goddesses. People entered respectfully, offered prayers, and often avoided harming the oldest trees growing within them. The trees themselves became part of worship. Historians still argue whether these sacred groves functioned primarily as religious sanctuaries or whether they also served practical purposes by protecting valuable woodland from excessive cutting. Perhaps wisdom quietly accomplished both goals at once. After all, calling something sacred is often an excellent way to convince people not to chop it down. Bird song echoes through the branches overhead. You spot finches darting between the leaves. A woodpecker taps patiently against a distant trunk. Somewhere farther away, bees hum lazily among clusters of wild thyme, blooming between sunlit stones. The entire grove feels alive without feeling busy. Even the wind seems careful here. Ahead, several people gather beneath an enormous plane tree. At first glance, they appear to be resting. Then you hear conversation. Not ordinary conversation. Questions, answers, more questions. A teacher draws simple shapes in the dust using a walking stick, while his students watch thoughtfully. One idea leads naturally into another. There are no classrooms, no chalkboards, just shade, curiosity, and enough fresh air to keep everyone comfortably awake. Mostly. One student quietly stifles a yawn. Even philosophy occasionally loses to lunch. One quirky historical tidbit tells us that philosophers often taught while walking through gardens or shaded groves. This style of teaching became so closely associated with certain schools of thought that later generations continued the tradition of strolling while discussing ideas. Apparently, thinking improves when your legs are involved. Modern meetings might benefit from fewer conference tables and a few more trees. You continue wandering deeper into the grove. Small shrines appear unexpectedly beside ancient trunks. Simple offerings of olives, flowers, or woven garlands rest quietly upon weathered stones. Nothing extravagant, nothing forced, just gentle reminders that nature and belief comfortably shared the same space. The scent of pine resin drifts through the warm afternoon air. Nearby, someone gathers medicinal herbs growing naturally beneath scattered rocks. Sage, rosemary, wild oregano, plants that season meals today once carried equal importance as medicine, fragrance, and sacred offerings. Nothing here serves only one purpose. You begin noticing how differently the Greeks seem to shape landscapes compared with earlier civilizations. Instead of redesigning nature entirely, they often worked alongside it. A rocky hillside remained rocky. A grove remained wild. Human hands simply added paths, benches, fountains, and places for gathering. The landscape kept its own personality. Children appear along the path carrying woven baskets. Their mission seems straightforward enough: collect olives shaken gently from lower branches. Within moments, however, one discovers a remarkably interesting tortoise. The olive harvest pauses immediately. Several children kneel to inspect the slow-moving visitor with complete fascination. The tortoise continues walking, very slowly, completely unaware it has become today's entertainment. Honestly, it probably has nowhere urgent to be. You almost envy that schedule. Farther ahead, a narrow spring emerges naturally from the hillside. Clear water trickles into a shallow stone basin before continuing downhill. Travelers stop to drink, others simply sit nearby, enjoying the cool shade and peaceful sound of moving water. No elaborate fountain is necessary. Nature has already done the difficult work. As afternoon gradually softens, sunlight filters through olive trees in shifting patterns that dance gently across the ground. The grove becomes quieter, conversation slow, birdsong grows more noticeable. You settle on one of the smooth stone benches beneath the oldest tree. Its bark bears the marks of countless seasons. Storms survived, droughts endured, generations welcomed beneath its branches. It occurs to you that trees measure time differently from people. Centuries become ordinary. You close your eyes for just a moment. The breeze brushes gently across your face. Leaves rustle overhead. Somewhere nearby, laughter drifts faintly through the grove before fading once more into peaceful silence. This place does not demand excitement. It quietly offers calm instead. As evening approaches, you leave the sacred grove by a winding path leading westward. The olive trees slowly thin. Ahead, broad roads begin climbing toward another civilization, famous for transforming gardens into places of astonishing elegance. Marble statues, flowing fountains, hidden courtyards. The villas of ancient Rome are waiting just beyond the next sunrise.
The olive groves gradually disappear behind you as the road becomes broader and smoother. Stone markers line the route at regular intervals. Travelers pass more frequently now. Merchants guide wagons loaded with amphorae. Messengers ride past at impressive speed, looking very important, despite occasionally having to slow down for an especially determined flock of sheep. The sheep remain completely unimpressed. Empires may rise and fall. Sheep continue eating grass. Ahead, the countryside changes once again. Rolling hills give way to carefully managed estates where vineyards stretch across gentle slopes and neat rows of cypress trees lead your eye toward elegant country villas. You have arrived in the world of ancient Rome. The Romans admired many ideas from the cultures that came before them. Gardens were certainly one of them. But being Romans, they decided they could make them just a little grander. One of the best-known historical facts is that wealthy Romans built elaborate villa gardens featuring fountains, sculptures, shaded walkways, flower beds, ornamental pools, fruit trees, and carefully clipped hedges. These gardens were designed as places for relaxation, conversation, reading, and displaying wealth and refined taste. The Roman version of having a nice backyard was ambitious. You pass beneath an archway covered with climbing vines. Immediately, the sounds of the outside road begin to fade. Ahead stretches a long gravel path, bordered by neatly trimmed box hedges no taller than your knees. Their straight edges are so perfectly maintained that you briefly wonder whether someone carries a ruler while gardening. Knowing the Romans, it seems entirely possible. Tall marble statues stand quietly among flowering shrubs. Some depict gods, others celebrate heroes. A few simply appear determined to look thoughtful forever. They succeed admirably. At the center of the garden, a fountain sends clear water sparkling into a wide circular basin.
Sunlight catches every droplet, turning the spray into countless tiny flashes of silver. The sound is wonderfully gentle, not loud enough to dominate the garden, just enough to soften every conversation nearby. Several visitors stroll slowly along shaded colonnades. One pauses beside a rose bush. Another studies a sculpture. A pair of friends debates poetry while wandering beneath climbing grapevines. Nobody seems to be in a hurry. Roman gardens encourage lingering. You soon notice how carefully every view has been planned. A path curves just enough to reveal a statue at precisely the right moment. An opening between trees frames distant hills like a painting. Flower beds draw the eye naturally toward sparkling water. Nothing feels accidental. The landscape itself has become architecture. Historians still argue whether Roman villa gardens were influenced more strongly by Greek philosophical ideals of harmony or by Persian concepts of enclosed paradise. Most likely, Roman designers blended ideas from many cultures into something uniquely their own. Good ideas, after all, travel remarkably well. A gardener kneels beside a hedge with a pair of bronze shears. Snip, snip, snip. Each careful cut keeps the hedge crisp and orderly. Nearby, another trims climbing vines that have become just a little too enthusiastic. Plants, it seems, occasionally require polite reminders about personal space. One vine appears unconvinced. It has already begun climbing the nearby statue. Perhaps it simply admires art. One quirky historical tidbit comes from Roman topiary, the practice of trimming shrubs into decorative shapes. Wealthy homeowners sometimes trained bushes into animals, geometric forms, or elaborate ornamental designs, creating living sculptures that amazed visiting guests. Imagine arriving for dinner only to be greeted by a hedge shaped like a dolphin. You would certainly remember the invitation. The scent of roses mingles with lavender and rosemary growing along the pathways. Fresh herbs release their fragrance whenever someone brushes gently past. Bees hum lazily between blossoms. Butterflies drift through patches of sunlight. The entire garden seems carefully balanced between order and life. Not sterile, not wild, simply harmonious. You discover a shaded pergola overlooking a long reflecting pool. The water mirrors towering cypress trees, standing like green columns against the afternoon sky. Several bright orange fish glide beneath floating lily pads. You settle onto a smooth stone bench. The marble remains pleasantly cool despite the warmth of the day. A servant quietly places a scroll beside his master before withdrawing without a sound. The gentleman begins reading beneath the shade while birds sing overhead. You realize the Romans understood something many people still rediscover today. Books become even better when read outdoors, especially if someone else is responsible for trimming the hedges. Children play quietly near another fountain. They float tiny wooden boats across the basin. One immediately becomes stuck among lily stems. Its young captain attempts a dramatic rescue using a very long stick. The rescue succeeds. The audience, consisting mainly of 2 ducks, shows limited enthusiasm. The ducks continue investigating something far more interesting under the water. As afternoon drifts onward, musicians begin playing soft melodies beneath an open pavilion. The music carries lightly through the garden without disturbing its peaceful rhythm. Guests continue strolling. Conversations rise and fall like the fountains themselves. No one raises their voice. There is no need. The garden naturally slows everything around it. Further along, you enter a small orchard filled with fig trees, pears, and pomegranates. Ripe fruit hang invitingly from the branches. Garden workers carefully inspect each tree for signs of disease or thirsty roots. Beauty alone is never enough. Healthy gardens require constant attention. You begin noticing subtle engineering hidden beneath the elegance. Tiny channels guide excess rainfall away. Stone walls support sloping ground. Underground pipes quietly feed fountains. The Romans rarely separated beauty from clever construction. If something could be useful, it might as well be beautiful too. As golden evening light washes across the villa, marble statues glow softly against dark green foliage. Long shadows stretch over the gravel paths. The fountains continue their endless conversation with gravity. Everything feels calm, balanced, complete. Yet your journey through ancient gardens is far from over. Tomorrow, your attention will turn away from walls, fountains, and architecture towards something even more fascinating: the plants themselves. Every flower, every herb, and every tree has been quietly telling a story all along. You are finally about to learn their hidden language.
Morning sunlight slips gently through the cypress branches, and tiny drops of dew cling to rose petals like little pieces of glass. The Roman villa behind you slowly grows quieter as gardeners begin their daily work. You follow a narrower path leading away from the grand fountains and polished marble statues. At first, it seems almost ordinary. Flower beds, small trees, neatly arranged herbs, nothing especially dramatic. Then you begin paying closer attention. That single white lily growing beside the path? It means something. The tall laurel tree shading the bench, it carries a story older than the villa itself. Even the humble rosemary releasing its fragrance beneath your fingertips has quietly earned a place in ceremonies, kitchens, and medicine cabinets across centuries. Ancient gardens were never simply collections of attractive plants. They were living libraries. Every leaf held a memory. Every blossom whispered a message. One of the best established historical facts is that ancient civilizations often attached symbolic meaning to particular plants. Trees, flowers, herbs, and fruits regularly appeared in religious ceremonies, myths, royal celebrations, and everyday customs, with many meanings surviving into later cultures. You suddenly realize you have been walking through conversations without understanding the language. A gardener notices your curiosity. He kneels beside a blooming lily and gently brushes one finger along its elegant white petals. No words are needed. Its beauty explains why so many ancient people associated lilies with purity, renewal, and sacred rituals. Nearby, brilliant red poppies sway softly in the breeze. Today, many people connect poppies with remembrance. Long before that tradition developed, ancient cultures admired them for different reasons: their vivid color, their delicate petals, their connection with sleep and dreams. You smile. Considering tonight's peaceful journey, that feels especially appropriate. Not too much, though. You still need to finish the walk. A sleepy traveler tends to miss interesting flowers. You continue beneath an arch draped with climbing grapevines. Clusters of ripening fruit hang overhead, glowing softly in the morning light. Grapes represented abundance across many civilizations, not only because they produced food and wine, but because healthy vines suggested fertile land, careful cultivation, and prosperous communities. A neglected vineyard quickly announces itself. Plants, unlike polite dinner guests, rarely hide their feelings. Historians still argue whether symbolic meanings attached to plants spread mainly through trade and cultural exchange, or whether different civilizations independently developed remarkably similar associations with certain trees and flowers. A rose inspires admiration almost everywhere it blooms. Perhaps some ideas simply grow naturally.
The path bends toward a grove of towering cypress trees. Their dark, narrow shapes reach gracefully into the bright sky. Unlike spreading oaks or fruit-heavy figs, cypress trees possess a quiet dignity. Many ancient cultures planted them near sacred places and burial grounds because their evergreen branches suggested endurance beyond the changing seasons. Even standing perfectly still, they somehow feel thoughtful. One quirky historical tidbit tells us that Romans sometimes crowned successful poets, generals, and athletes with wreaths made from laurel leaves rather than precious metals. Imagine training for years to win a championship, only to receive a hat made of leaves. To be fair, it was a very prestigious hat. You secretly suspect modern award ceremonies could become considerably more interesting if winners had to water their trophies afterwards. Nearby, fragrant rosemary spills gently across the edge of a stone planter. The gardener encourages you to crush one tiny leaf between your fingers. Instantly, a fresh herbal scent fills the air. Ancient people associated rosemary with memory, celebration, and loyalty. Its fragrance lingered long after ceremonies ended. Perhaps that explains why memories often arrive unexpectedly through scent. A single familiar aroma can quietly unlock an entire forgotten afternoon. The herb beds continue almost endlessly. Mint, sage, thyme, fennel, lavender, each one carefully labeled, not with wooden signs, of course, but in the gardener's remarkable memory. He knows every plant, where it thrives, when it flowers, how much water it prefers, which insects enjoy visiting. You begin wondering whether gardeners secretly know more about patience than anyone else. The evidence keeps growing. Children wander into the herb garden carrying tiny woven baskets. Their assignment seems wonderfully simple: gather lavender blossoms. Unfortunately, a butterfly immediately changes everyone's priorities. Within moments, the lavender has been temporarily forgotten. The butterfly zigzags confidently through the garden, while several enthusiastic children attempt to follow. The butterfly wins comfortably. Some victories require surprisingly little effort. You leave the herbs behind and enter an orchard where pomegranate trees glow with brilliant scarlet blossoms. Their unusual fruit has fascinated people for thousands of years. Cut one open, and hundreds of tiny seeds appear inside. To ancient observers, such abundance naturally suggested fertility, prosperity, and new beginnings. Nature occasionally enjoys making its symbolism wonderfully obvious. Farther ahead stands an ancient oak, its enormous branches spread outward like welcoming arms. Smaller plants flourish beneath its shade. Birds nest safely among its leaves. Squirrels race confidently along its limbs. One squirrel pauses dramatically to inspect you. You nod politely. The squirrel appears satisfied. Diplomatic relations have been successfully established. Many ancient peoples regarded great oaks as symbols of strength and endurance. Looking at this magnificent tree, it is easy to understand why. The breeze strengthens gently as afternoon approaches. Flower petals drift across the pathways like tiny colorful snowflakes. Bees continue their endless work. Birdsong echoes between the trees. Everywhere you look, plants quietly communicate ideas without speaking a single word. Beauty, hope, memory, renewal, strength, peace. You realize that ancient gardeners were not merely arranging colors and shapes, they were arranging meaning. As the afternoon slowly softens into evening, you pause one last time beside a bed of blooming roses. The petals glow warmly beneath the golden sunlight. Their fragrance lingers gently in the cooling air. Tomorrow, your attention will shift away from the plants themselves and toward the remarkable people whose hands made all this possible. because behind every flourishing ancient garden stood generations of gardeners whose quiet skill transformed soil, water, and sunlight into living works of art.
The fragrance of roses lingers gently behind you as the garden awakens to another peaceful morning. For a while, you simply stand still. The flowers seem perfect. The trees cast graceful shadows. The fountains sparkle as though they have always flowed. It is remarkably easy to imagine that such beauty simply exists. Then you hear it. The soft scrape of a rake across gravel, the splash of water poured into dry soil, the steady rhythm of pruning shears clipping a wandering branch. The garden is awake because its caretakers are awake. Beauty, it turns out, rises early. One of the clearest historical facts about ancient gardens is that they demanded constant maintenance. Whether in Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome, large gardens required teams of skilled gardeners responsible for irrigation, pruning, planting, harvesting, pest control, and seasonal planning. A magnificent garden was never accidental. It was a daily conversation between people and nature. You follow the sounds until you reach a broad orchard where several gardeners have already begun their work. Nobody appears hurried. Nobody wastes a movement. Each task flows naturally into the next. One man gently loosens the soil around the roots of a fig tree. Another trims away damaged branches from a pomegranate. A woman carefully ties climbing vines to a wooden support before the wind has a chance to pull them astray. Nearby, two apprentices carry heavy clay jars filled with water. Judging by the expressions on their faces, they are rapidly becoming experts in the subject of gravity. Fortunately, the jars remain upright, mostly. The oldest gardener notices you watching. His hands are weathered. His tunic carries faint traces of soil despite being freshly washed. He smiles quietly before kneeling beside a young olive tree. Without speaking, he presses one finger gently into the earth. The soil is slightly dry. He nods. The tree receives water. No complicated instruments, no electronic sensors, just experience gathered over decades. Sometimes knowledge lives in fingertips. Historians still argue whether ancient gardeners passed most of their expertise through formal apprenticeships or through generations of family tradition. In many places, both methods likely existed side by side, allowing practical wisdom to survive for centuries. Some lessons fit more comfortably in conversation than in books. You continue deeper into the working parts of the garden. Here, beauty quietly gives way to preparation. Compost piles slowly transform fallen leaves into rich, dark soil. Bundles of reeds wait to become plant supports. Stacks of clay pots stand drying beneath the morning sun. Seeds are carefully sorted into woven baskets according to season. Nothing is discarded without thought. Even yesterday's leaves become tomorrow's nourishment. The cycle never truly ends. One quirky historical tidbit comes from Roman writers who described gardeners experimenting with grafting fruit trees. By joining branches from one tree onto another, they could improve fruit production or grow desirable varieties more reliably. Imagine explaining that to someone seeing it for the first time. So, you're attaching one tree to another tree? Exactly. And this works? Surprisingly often. Nature occasionally rewards bold ideas. Nearby, several workers inspect irrigation channels. One removes a small clump of weeds blocking the flow. Another repairs a cracked section of stone lining with fresh mortar. The water resumes its gentle journey. Such tiny repairs rarely appear in poems, yet without them, there would be very little poetry about gardens.
You begin appreciating maintenance in a whole new way. Children arrive carrying baskets filled with freshly gathered herbs. An older gardener checks each bundle carefully, not because he doubts the children, because some plants look remarkably similar. Choosing the correct herb matters, especially if tonight's soup and tonight's medicine happen to grow side by side. Nobody wants soup with unexpected consequences. The herb garden itself hums softly with bees. Lavender attracts dozens of them. The gardeners seem entirely comfortable working nearby. One apprentice pauses nervously as a bee circles his head. The older gardener chuckles. It is interested in flowers. A brief pause. Not your haircut. The apprentice visibly relaxes. The bee continues its important work. Everyone wins. As the afternoon warms, the gardeners move toward the shaded nursery where tiny figs, young olives, and fresh pomegranates, each carefully protected from harsh sunlight until strong enough to stand alone. Looking around, you realize something remarkable. Every mature tree surrounding the garden once occupied one of these small nursery beds. Greatness often begins quietly. The head gardener walks slowly through every pathway, not inspecting people, inspecting plants. He notices one yellowing leaf, a damaged stem, a thirsty shrub, a rose requiring support. Nothing escapes his attention. You suspect he could probably identify every tree in the garden while blindfolded, simply by touching the bark, perhaps even by listening politely. Toward evening, workers gather beneath a broad sycamore tree for a simple meal. Fresh bread, cheese, dates, olives, cool water. Conversation flows easily. Someone tells a story about chasing an escaped goat through the herb garden. Apparently, the goat believed itself an excellent landscape designer. The rosemary disagreed. Laughter spreads beneath the branches. Even after long hours of labor, these people still find room for humor. Perhaps gardens encourage that too. You glance back across the grounds. From this distance, visitors would see only graceful trees, colorful flowers, and sparkling fountains. Few would imagine the countless hands responsible for every blossom. Beauty often hides the work that created it. As the sun begins lowering toward the horizon, birds gradually return to the branches above. The gardeners quietly gather their tools. Tomorrow they will begin again, because living things never stop growing, and neither, it seems, to those who care for them. The evening breeze carries new sounds across the garden. Gentle splashes, birdsong, the flutter of wings above the ponds. Tomorrow, your attention will leave the gardeners behind and follow the countless animals that have quietly shared these ancient gardens all along. After all, humans were never the only visitors wandering beneath these trees.
Morning arrives with a chorus rather than an alarm clock. Before you even open your eyes, birds have already begun negotiating territory, announcing breakfast, greeting the sunrise, or perhaps simply expressing very strong opinions about absolutely everything. Birds are wonderfully difficult to interpret. You stretch beneath the shade of a fig tree while soft golden light filters through the leaves overhead. A gentle breeze stirs the branches. Somewhere nearby, water trickles into a stone pool. The garden feels wonderfully alive, not because people are busy working, because countless animals have quietly begun another ordinary day. One of the clearest historical facts about ancient gardens is that they naturally attracted wildlife. Pools, fruit trees, flowering plants, and shaded groves created ideal habitats for birds, bees, butterflies, fish, frogs, and many smaller creatures that became part of the garden's everyday rhythm. A healthy garden was never silent. You wander toward the nearest reflecting pool. The
The water appears perfectly still until a bright orange fish glides beneath a floating lily pad. Another follows, then another. Within moments, the entire pool seems alive with gentle movement. The fish weave gracefully between stems of lotus flowers as sunlight dances across their scales. Nobody appears to be feeding them. They simply belong here. Ancient visitors often found watching fish surprisingly relaxing. You understand why. They possess an impressive talent for making absolutely nothing seem deeply important. Nearby, a pair of ducks lands rather dramatically upon the water. A magnificent splash follows. Several elegant ripples spread across the previously perfect reflection. The ducks paddle away, looking completely satisfied with themselves. If ducks ever apologize, history has neglected to record it. The path curves through a grove where flowering shrubs hum softly beneath the steady work of bees. You pause. Hundreds of tiny wings vibrate among lavender blossoms. The sound is almost hypnotic. Not loud, just constant, like nature quietly reminding you that important work rarely needs dramatic announcements. One of the clearest historical facts is that bees were valued across many ancient civilizations, not only because they produced honey and wax, but also because their pollination helped fruit trees and flowering plants thrive. Long before scientists explained pollination, gardeners noticed that bees were remarkably good neighbors. Historians still argue whether ancient gardeners fully understood the biological role insects played in plant reproduction, or whether they simply recognized through observation that gardens flourished where bees were abundant. Practical knowledge often arrives before scientific explanation. A butterfly drifts lazily across the path ahead. Its wings shimmer blue whenever sunlight catches them. A child quietly follows from several steps behind. Very quietly, very carefully. The butterfly changes direction without warning. The child follows. The butterfly changes direction again. This continues for several wonderfully entertaining minutes. The butterfly remains comfortably ahead. You suspect this is not its first victory. Farther beneath the trees, birds gather among branches heavy with ripe figs. Finches hop confidently from twig to twig. A dove coos softly nearby. One particularly energetic sparrow appears determined to inspect every single branch before breakfast. Efficiency is clearly not today's goal. Enjoyment seems more likely. Gardeners watch without concern. The birds nibble a little fruit. In return, they help scatter seeds and consume countless insects. The arrangement appears pleasantly fair. One quirky historical tidbit comes from ancient Egyptian gardens, where decorative ponds sometimes housed sacred geese or ducks that appeared in religious art and ceremonial processions. Certain birds carried symbolic meanings beyond their everyday presence. Imagine discovering your local duck has an official religious title. That duck would probably become even more confident. You continue walking toward a shaded corner where tall reeds border a narrow stream. Almost immediately, frogs announce your arrival by leaping enthusiastically into the water. Plop, plop, plop. Within seconds, the reeds become perfectly still once again. The frogs have vanished. You wait quietly. Eventually, one curious pair of eyes peeks above the surface. Apparently, you've passed the inspection. Dragonflies dart through shafts of sunlight overhead. Their delicate wings flash like tiny jewels before disappearing among the reeds. They hover effortlessly, pause, then shoot away with astonishing speed. Ancient observers often admired dragonflies without fully understanding how extraordinary they truly are. Honestly, we still do. The garden orchard welcomes you with another surprise. Tiny squirrels race along thick branches, carrying nuts almost as large as their heads. One pauses halfway up a tree, looks directly at you, then continues climbing with complete determination. You quietly applaud. The squirrel neither notices nor requests further encouragement. Professional focus deserves respect. Nearby, gardeners inspect several fruit trees where small woven baskets protect ripening figs from overly enthusiastic birds. Not every negotiation between humans and wildlife proceeds perfectly. Sometimes everyone simply agrees to share, mostly. The scent of blooming herbs grows stronger as afternoon sunlight warms the soil. Bees continue their patient work. Butterflies wander between flowers. Bright green lizards bask comfortably on warm stones before darting away at astonishing speed. Life hides everywhere. You simply need to slow down enough to notice it. As evening begins settling gently across the garden, birds gradually return to their nests. The chorus softens. Fish glide lazily beneath fading reflections. Even the bees seem content to retire after another productive day. The entire garden exhales. You realize these ancient landscapes were never created for people alone. Every flower attracted insects. Every tree sheltered birds. Every pond welcomed fish. Every quiet corner offered a home to something living. Tomorrow, you'll discover that many of those same plants served another remarkable purpose. Hidden among the blossoms and greenery grows an entire world of ancient medicine, where healing quietly flourishes in plain sight.
The morning sun rises slowly above the garden walls, painting the tops of the cypress trees with soft gold before its light reaches the winding paths below. The birds are already awake. The bees have resumed their tiny but determined careers. Somewhere, a gardener is humming quietly while watering rows of herbs. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels wasted. You follow a narrow stone path that seems almost hidden beneath climbing vines. Unlike the grand avenues lined with statues and fountains, this corner of the garden feels more practical, smaller, more intimate. Clay pots stand neatly arranged on low shelves. Bundles of dried herbs hang beneath a wooden awning. Tiny wooden labels mark rows of carefully cultivated plants. At first glance, it resembles an ordinary kitchen garden. Then the scent reaches you. Sharp mint, sweet fennel, earthy sage, warm rosemary, lavender drifting gently through the morning air. This is no ordinary flower bed. This is an ancient pharmacy. One of the clearest historical facts is that gardens across ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, Persia, and many other civilizations supplied a remarkable variety of medicinal herbs. Physicians and healers relied on carefully cultivated plants to prepare remedies for common illnesses, wounds, digestion, and everyday discomforts. Long before pharmacies, there were gardeners. An elderly herbalist kneels beside a bed of thyme. His movements are slow but wonderfully confident. He pinches a few sprigs between his fingers before placing them carefully into a woven basket. Nothing is harvested carelessly. Every plant seems to be gathered at precisely the right moment. You notice that he occasionally pauses, not because he has forgotten his work, because he's observing the leaves, the flowers, the moisture in the soil. Healing begins long before the medicine is prepared. Historians still argue whether many ancient herbal remedies worked primarily because of their active medicinal ingredients or because belief and ritual also played significant roles in recovery. Perhaps both mattered. The body and the mind have always been remarkably good at helping one another. You continue farther into the herb garden. A young apprentice carefully grinds dried mint using a smooth stone mortar.
Nearby, another gently ties bundles of lavender with thin strips of reed. The fragrance fills the shaded workspace. It is difficult not to relax. Perhaps the lavender knows exactly what it is doing. One of the best-known medicinal plants is willow. Although the tree standing beside the stream appears quiet and unremarkable, its bark contains compounds related to those that eventually inspired modern aspirin. Ancient healers obviously knew nothing about chemistry, yet generations of careful observation taught them that certain plants consistently eased pain. Knowledge often grows one experiment at a time, usually over several centuries. One quirky historical tidbit suggests that some Roman gardeners grew rue not only as a medicinal herb, but also because many people believed it offered protection against bad luck and harmful influences. Whether it truly frightened away misfortune remains uncertain. It certainly frightened away anyone unfamiliar with its rather powerful aroma. The herb has confidence. You smile as the herbalist carefully places fresh rosemary into a clay bowl. He crushes a few leaves between his fingers. The scent becomes instantly stronger, fresh, woody, bright. You remember learning yesterday that rosemary symbolized memory. Now you discover it also served practical purposes in cooking and traditional medicine. Ancient people rarely separated beauty from usefulness. If a plant smelled wonderful, it might also heal, or season dinner, or both. The path curves toward a shaded orchard where pomegranate trees grow beside figs and olives. The herbalist explains that fruit itself often became medicine. Sweet figs soothed digestion. Pomegranates were valued in numerous traditional remedies. Olive oil appeared in everything from cooking to skincare. Nothing went to waste. A tree offered generously. People learned to appreciate every gift. Children arrive carrying baskets of chamomile blossoms. They proudly present their morning harvest. One child accidentally sneezes into the flowers. The others giggle. The blossoms remain surprisingly patient. Fortunately, flowers are wonderfully forgiving. Nearby, bees continue gathering nectar with complete professionalism. You suspect they would make excellent pharmacists, never distracted, always organized, exceptionally hard-working, though their customer service might occasionally sting. A narrow stream runs beside the herb garden. Water trickles gently over smooth stones before disappearing beneath hanging willow branches. Several medicinal plants thrive along the damp banks. The herbalist explains that different soils suit different herbs. Some love sunshine, others prefer shade. Some flourish beside water, others stubbornly insist upon dry hillsides. Plants possess personalities too. They simply express them more quietly. You pause beside a patch of fragrant sage. The breeze brushes gently through its soft gray-green leaves. Their subtle scent lingers in the cool air. For a moment, everything becomes wonderfully still. The buzzing bees, the distant bird song, the flowing water, the quiet footsteps of gardeners moving between the beds. Healing, you begin to realize, was never only about remedies. It was also about places like this, peaceful, orderly, alive. The garden itself became part of the medicine. As afternoon slowly fades toward evening, the herbalist stores carefully labeled bundles beneath the shelter of the wooden awning. Tomorrow they may become teas, oils, poultices, or perhaps simply comforting aromas filling a family home. You leave the herb garden carrying no basket, only appreciation. The setting sun casts long golden shadows across the pathways as musicians begin quietly tuning their instruments somewhere beyond the orchard. Laughter drifts faintly through the trees. Tables are being prepared beneath broad branches. Tomorrow evening, these peaceful gardens will become something entirely different, not quieter, but livelier. The flowers and fountains are about to welcome a royal celebration beneath the stars. The last rays of afternoon sunlight linger on the tops of the trees as the garden slowly transforms. Only a few hours ago, gardeners were trimming hedges, gathering herbs, and checking irrigation channels. Now the same pathways begin filling with servants carrying polished lamps, woven baskets, and long wooden tables. The garden is preparing for an evening unlike any other. You walk beneath an avenue of cypress trees where soft lantern light has already begun to glow. The flickering flames reflect gently in the fountains, making the water sparkle as though tiny stars have drifted down from the sky. The scent of fresh bread mixes with roasted figs, herbs, honey, and warm olive oil. Your stomach quietly reminds you that admiring gardens is pleasant, eating in them is even better. One of the best established historical facts is that wealthy households in civilizations such as ancient Rome and Persia often hosted outdoor meals and celebrations in carefully designed gardens. These spaces offered cooler temperatures, beautiful surroundings, and an atmosphere well suited for conversation, music, and hospitality. The garden was more than scenery. It became part of the feast itself. Servants carefully arrange cushions beneath broad plane trees. Low wooden tables are placed between flowering shrubs, so every guest enjoys a pleasant view. Clay lamps line the pathways one by one. As dusk deepens, their gentle glow slowly replaces the fading sunlight. Nothing feels hurried. Every movement has clearly been practiced many times before. Nearby, musicians quietly tune their instruments. A soft note from a lyre floats across the garden. A reed flute answers from somewhere beyond the reflecting pool. A small hand drum joins them for just a moment before falling silent again. Even preparing the music sounds peaceful. One young musician plucks the same string 3 times in a row. Apparently, perfection occasionally requires repetition. The string finally agrees. You continue strolling while the celebration slowly gathers around you. Guests arrive dressed in flowing garments that catch the evening breeze. Some pause immediately to admire the flowers. Others wander toward the fountains. A few greet old friends beneath the vines before taking their places. Nobody rushes directly to the food. That would be considered rather impolite. Besides, the aromas are not going anywhere. Historians still argue whether these elaborate garden banquets primarily displayed wealth and social status, or whether they genuinely reflected a cultural appreciation for nature, hospitality, and leisurely conversation. Perhaps both ideas grew happily together. After all, people have always enjoyed sharing beautiful places with friends. One quirky historical tidbit tells us that Roman hosts sometimes scattered flower petals during dining areas during especially lavish feasts. Roses were among their favorites, filling the air with fragrance while creating an unforgettable visual display. Imagine being responsible for sweeping up afterwards. Some traditions sound slightly more romantic before cleanup begins. The first dishes begin appearing: fresh olives, soft cheeses, dates, figs, grapes still cool from shaded vineyards, warm bread brushed lightly with fragrant olive oil. Simple foods, beautifully prepared. Ancient gardens supplied much of what now fills the tables. Fruit traveled only a few dozen steps. Herbs were gathered that very afternoon. Nothing tastes fresher than food harvested within sight of where you sit. Children weave happily between the tables until gently reminded not to chase each other near the reflecting pool. One nearly succeeds in convincing another that the fish are secretly listening to the music. The second child crouches beside the water. The fish continue swimming peacefully. Their opinions remain wonderfully mysterious. You suspect they enjoy the performance. The evidence is admittedly limited. As darkness settles, the musicians begin in earnest. The melodies drift softly through the warm evening air without overwhelming conversation. People speak quietly, laugh gently, pause often. The music becomes another part of the landscape, flowing alongside the fountains and rustling leaves. A storyteller eventually rises from his seat. The conversations naturally soften. Everyone turns toward him. His voice carries easily beneath the branches as he begins recounting an old tale about heroes, distant kingdoms, and clever travelers who relied as much on wisdom as courage. You smile. It reminds you of the first evening of your own journey. Stories always seem richer beneath open skies. Nearby, servants refill small clay cups with cool water, flavored lightly with herbs and fruit. Others carry platters of roasted vegetables, seasoned with rosemary and thyme, gathered earlier that very morning. The aroma alone could probably persuade someone to become a gardener. The head gardener quietly watches from a respectful distance. He does not sit among the honored guests, yet without his work, there would be no evening like this. The flowers, the shade, the fruit, the herbs, even the peaceful atmosphere surrounding everyone owes something to his careful hands. Beauty often celebrates its creators quietly. The moon rises above the cypress trees. Its pale light joins the flickering lamps, creating gentle silver reflections across the pools. Crickets begin their nightly chorus. The breeze cools pleasantly. Conversations become slower. No one seems eager for the evening to end. You understand why. Gardens change after sunset. Colors soften. Scents grow stronger. Sounds become gentler. The familiar paths somehow feel slightly magical. A final song drifts through the trees. Guests listen without interruption. When it ends, nobody applauds immediately. The silence afterwards feels just as beautiful. Eventually, quiet smiles replace words. The gathering slowly begins to dissolve as families make their way home beneath the stars. Lanterns remain glowing along the paths. The fountains continue whispering into the night. Tomorrow, your journey will leave these very real celebrations behind and wander into another kind of garden altogether, a place where myths bloom beside flowers, where sacred trees shelter ancient legends, and where the boundary between nature and the divine becomes wonderfully difficult to find.
The last lantern from the evening feast flickers gently behind you. Its warm glow slowly disappears between rows of cypress trees until only the moon remains, silver and calm above the sleeping garden. Morning arrives quietly. There are no musicians now, no banquet tables, only dew resting on flower petals and the faint sound of doves greeting another sunrise. The garden feels older today, not physically, spiritually, as though countless stories have settled among its branches over thousands of years. You begin walking toward a secluded grove where the pathways become narrower and the trees grow taller. Something about this place feels different. The air is cooler beneath the dense canopy. The birds sing more softly. Even your footsteps seem reluctant to disturb the silence. This is where myths have taken root. One of the best established historical facts is that ancient gardens and sacred groves often played important roles in mythology and religion. Across Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, and Mesopotamia, certain trees, springs, and gardens were believed to be connected with gods, heroes, or sacred events. Nature was never just scenery, it was part of the story.
You step beneath the broad branches of an ancient oak. Its trunk is so enormous that several people linking hands together might struggle to reach all the way around it. The bark is rough beneath your fingertips. Its roots disappear deep into the earth, hidden beneath moss and fallen leaves. You cannot help wondering how many generations have rested beneath these branches, how many children climbed them, how many travelers paused here, how many stories began exactly where you are standing. Historians still argue whether sacred trees became important because of existing religious beliefs or whether extraordinary old trees inspired reverence simply through their immense age and presence. Perhaps the oldest trees quietly created their own legends. It is surprisingly easy to believe. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves overhead. Sunlight filters through in shimmering patterns that dance across the forest floor. For a brief moment, you almost expect someone or something to emerge from between the trunks. Ancient people certainly imagined such possibilities. Many believed forests, springs, and groves were home to unseen spirits or divine beings. Whether literally or symbolically, these beliefs encouraged respect for places that felt larger than everyday life. The path winds toward a crystal-clear spring, bubbling from beneath smooth stones. Its water is so transparent that every pebble beneath the surface appears perfectly visible. Wildflowers bloom naturally around its edges. Nobody has planted them. Nature has arranged this corner beautifully enough without assistance. A quirky historical tidbit tells us that in parts of the ancient Greek world, people sometimes left tiny offerings beside sacred springs, small figurines, pottery, or simple gifts, in hopes of receiving good fortune or honoring the spirits believed to dwell there. Imagine explaining to future archaeologists why someone carefully placed a tiny clay cup beside a stream. Fortunately, future archaeologists tend to enjoy mysteries. You continue deeper into the grove. A laurel tree spreads graceful branches over a small stone altar. Its leaves shimmer softly whenever the wind passes. You remember yesterday's laurel wreaths awarded to poets and champions. Here, the tree carries another meaning. It recalls ancient stories, connecting it with divine transformation and lasting remembrance. Plants, you have discovered, rarely tell only one story. Birdsong echoes gently between the trunks. A robin lands nearby, tilting its head toward you with remarkable confidence. It hops twice, pauses, then flies effortlessly into the canopy. You briefly consider following. Your wings, unfortunately, remain under development. Farther along, vines climb naturally across weathered stone ruins nearly hidden beneath moss. Nature has begun quietly reclaiming the work of human hands. The result is unexpectedly beautiful. Walls soften beneath greenery. Broken columns become homes for climbing flowers. Time itself appears to be gardening. You reach a small clearing where a solitary olive tree grows. Its twisted trunk reminds you of the first grove you visited in Greece. Perhaps not every ancient tree became famous. Some simply lived long, peaceful lives while offering shade to anyone who wandered beneath them. That seems like a worthy legacy. Nearby, butterflies drift lazily among blooming wildflowers. Bees hum patiently from blossom to blossom. A dragonfly pauses above the spring before darting away like a tiny blue jewel. The myths surrounding this place never chased away ordinary life. They simply gave it deeper meaning. As afternoon unfolds, you notice carved stones depicting leaves, vines, and flowers woven together with images of birds and flowing water. Ancient artists rarely separated nature from belief. Each strengthened the other. Gardens became reminders that beauty itself could inspire wonder. children arrive carrying woven flower garlands, they gently place them upon a small shrine before sitting quietly beneath the trees. No one tells them to be silent. The grove somehow encourages it. Peace has its own language. You settle beside the spring one final time. The water continues flowing exactly as it has for centuries, perhaps longer. You cup your hands and watch the current slip effortlessly between your fingers. Nothing tries to hold the water. Nothing asks it to stop. It simply continues its journey. As the sun begins lowering behind the trees, long golden beams stretch across the clearing. The grove glows warmly for a few precious moments before gradually returning to gentle shade. Tomorrow, your own journey will uncover gardens that vanished beneath earth, dust, and forgotten centuries. Their flowers disappeared long ago, yet beneath the soil, patient archaeologists still have remarkable stories left to tell.
The sacred grove slowly disappears behind you as the morning mist begins to lift. The birds remain. The breeze remains. Even the scent of wildflowers lingers for a while. But the path ahead feels different. Less like a place that has survived, more like a place that has been forgotten. Grass grows over broken stones. Tree roots weave through old walls. Wildflowers bloom where carefully planned flower beds once stood. If nobody told you otherwise, you might never guess that a magnificent garden had once flourished here. That is the strange magic of time. It rarely destroys everything at once. Instead, it patiently asks nature to reclaim what people leave behind. One of the most important historical facts is that archaeologists have uncovered the remains of numerous ancient gardens by studying irrigation channels, pollen grains, seeds, tree pits, root traces, ancient artwork, and soil patterns. Even when every visible flower has vanished, the earth often preserves subtle clues about landscapes that disappeared thousands of years ago. Sometimes history survives underground. You kneel beside what appears to be an ordinary patch of dry soil. At first glance, nothing seems remarkable. Then, an archaeologist gently brushes away loose earth with a soft tool. Slowly, the outline of an ancient stone pathway begins to emerge. Another careful sweep reveals part of a narrow irrigation channel. Piece by piece, the invisible garden begins returning, not through magic, through patience. Nearby, several researchers examine tiny bags carefully labeled with excavation dates and locations. Inside them lie ancient seeds no larger than grains of rice. To most people, they appear insignificant. To archaeologists, they are priceless. A single preserved seed can reveal which plants once grew here, what people cultivated, and sometimes even what seasons mattered most to the community. Tiny evidence, enormous stories. Historians still argue whether some famous ancient gardens, especially those celebrated in later writings, looked exactly as ancient authors described, or whether generations of storytelling gradually exaggerated their beauty. The truth often lies somewhere between memory and imagination. You continue walking through the excavation. Wooden markers identify the locations of former ponds. Stone borders reveal vanished flower beds. Circular stains in the soil show where trees once stood. The trees themselves disappeared centuries ago, yet their roots quietly left signatures beneath the ground. Nature remembers. One quirky historical tidbit comes from archaeologists who have occasionally identified ancient gardens by studying fossilized pollen trapped in old wells or layers of mud.
These microscopic grains can reveal what kinds of flowers bloomed nearby thousands of years earlier. Imagine solving history using ancient dust. That is both astonishing and an excellent reminder never to underestimate pollen. A gentle breeze crosses the site. Wild grasses ripple where formal lawns may have once been carefully maintained. Butterflies wander freely among scattered flowers. Birds perch atop broken columns without the slightest concern for archaeology. Life continues, just differently. One researcher carefully uncovers fragments of a clay irrigation pipe. Another measures the distance between planting pits with remarkable precision. Everything is recorded, photographed, drawn, discussed. No detail is too small. Recovering the past often depends upon extraordinary attention to ordinary things. You pause beside the outline of a rectangular reflecting pool. Its polished stone edges remain surprisingly intact. There is no water now, only sunlight resting quietly upon weathered rock. Still, you can almost imagine it. Lotus flowers floating peacefully, fish gliding beneath the surface, children laughing nearby, birds landing along the edges. The garden exists again, if only for a moment. Farther ahead, a partially reconstructed pergola stretches across one corner of the site. Only a few original stone supports remain. Modern wooden beams hint at how the structure once appeared. Climbing vines have already begun covering them. Nature seems delighted to assist the restoration. Several visitors wander respectfully through the pathways. Nobody speaks loudly. Ancient gardens inspire the same quiet voices as museums, forests, and libraries. Perhaps beautiful places naturally encourage gentleness. You notice an elderly archaeologist sitting beneath a temporary shade canopy. Instead of digging, he simply studies a notebook filled with sketches. His pages contain tree positions, canal layouts, flower beds, measurements. Slowly, countless fragments become a complete landscape. You realize archaeology resembles gardening in one important way. Neither rewards impatience. Nearby, children participating in an educational visit receive tiny brushes and practice uncovering imitation artifacts buried in sand. One proudly discovers a broken pottery fragment. Another insists she has found treasure. Technically, she may not be wrong. History itself can be treasure. The afternoon grows warmer. Researchers cover delicate discoveries with protective cloth before the strongest sunlight arrives. Conservation becomes just as important as excavation. Finding the past is only the beginning. Preserving it requires another kind of patience. You take one final look across the ancient garden. Today it appears quiet, incomplete, yet through careful work, forgotten landscapes continue returning to human memory, one small discovery at a time. The flowers may have vanished, the fountains may have fallen silent, but the stories, surprisingly, remain alive. As evening approaches, long shadows stretch across the excavation. Tomorrow, your journey will explore why so many of these remarkable gardens disappeared in the first place, and how time, climate, war, and simple neglect slowly transformed living paradises into memories beneath the soil.
The excavation site grows quiet behind you. The archaeologists carefully cover their discoveries before leaving for the evening, protecting fragile stones from the night's cool air. For a few moments, you stand alone among the faint outlines of pathways that once welcomed kings, gardeners, philosophers, musicians, and children. It is difficult to imagine such lively places becoming silent. Yet history quietly reminds you that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. Even gardens, especially gardens. One of the clearest historical facts is that many ancient gardens disappeared because the civilizations that maintained them declined or changed. Wars, shifting trade routes, political upheaval, neglected irrigation systems, and changing climates gradually transformed flourishing landscapes into abandoned ground. Gardens do not simply stop growing. They either continue receiving care, or nature begins writing a different story. You follow an old irrigation canal stretching away from the ruins. Centuries ago, clear water flowed steadily through its carefully shaped course. Today, only scattered stones remain. Grass grows between the cracks. A few wildflowers have claimed the edges. The canal has become part of the landscape once again. Without water, the orchards vanished. Without orchards, the gardeners left. Without gardeners, the paths slowly disappeared beneath weeds. The process took years, then decades, then centuries. No single dramatic moment marked the end, only countless ordinary days when nobody came to trim a hedge, clear a channel, or plant another tree. Historians still argue whether prolonged climate changes played a greater role than warfare in the disappearance of certain ancient landscapes. In many regions, both forces likely combined, making once fertile gardens increasingly difficult to sustain. Nature can be generous. Nature can also be patient. If people stop caring for a garden, the surrounding world rarely hurries. It simply waits, then quietly returns. You continue walking through the remains of what was once a magnificent orchard. The trees themselves have long since vanished. Only circular planting pits remain visible beneath the afternoon sunlight. Wild grasses sway where figs once ripened. Butterflies drift through flowers that planted themselves without permission. The landscape is still beautiful, just differently beautiful. One quirky historical tidbit comes from abandoned Roman villas, where archaeologists have discovered that certain ornamental plants survived for surprisingly long periods after the estates themselves were deserted. Hardy species continued blooming long after their owners had disappeared. Some flowers simply refused to give up. You rather admire that attitude. A gentle breeze carries the scent of dry earth. It is noticeably different from the rich fragrances of the living gardens you visited earlier. Less floral, more dusty. Yet even here, small signs of life continue. A lizard darts across an ancient stone wall. Swallows nest beneath broken arches. A rabbit disappears into tall grass, growing where carefully swept pathways once crossed. Nature never truly leaves. It merely rearranges the furniture. Farther ahead, you discover the remains of a once grand reflecting pool. The polished stone border still catches the sunlight. No water remains, only smooth pebbles scattered across the empty basin. You close your eyes for a moment. Almost immediately, your imagination quietly restores the missing pieces. Water shimmering beneath blue skies. Lotus blossoms floating gently. Children laughing nearby. Birds landing along the edges. The sounds are gone. The memory remains. You smile softly. Perhaps every ancient garden survives twice. Once in history, once in imagination. A lone olive tree grows from the edge of a withered wall. Nobody planted it here intentionally. A bird probably dropped the seed years ago. Its roots now weave through old stone, finding strength where architects never expected. Life has an extraordinary talent for adapting. Nearby, an elderly shepherd guides his sheep past the ruins.
His sheep wander calmly between fallen columns without any appreciation whatsoever for archaeology. One pauses beside an ancient marble fragment, sniffs it thoughtfully, then returns to eating grass. History receives mixed reviews from sheep. The shepherd nods politely as he passes. Perhaps he has walked this route hundreds of times. Perhaps these ruins have always been part of his landscape. To him, they are simply old stones. To you, they whisper forgotten centuries. As the afternoon light softens, long shadows stretch across broken walls. Golden sunlight paints each crack and weathered surface with quiet warmth. You notice tiny flowers growing directly from crevices in the stone. No gardener waters them, no one trims them. They bloom anyway. There is something deeply comforting about that. Even after kingdoms disappear, spring still arrives. You remember the Egyptian pools, the Persian water channels, the sacred Greek groves, the elegant Roman villas, the busy gardeners, the children chasing butterflies, the bees gathering nectar, the storytellers beneath the trees. None of those moments lasted forever. Yet together they shaped the history of gardens for generations that followed. Their influence continued long after the original flowers faded. Even modern parks, botanical gardens, and quiet backyard retreats carry echoes of ideas first nurtured thousands of years ago. Beauty travels remarkably well through time. The sun now hangs low above the horizon. Its light turns the ancient stones amber. Birdsong gradually replaces the sounds of the afternoon. The ruins settle peacefully into evening. Tomorrow will be your final full day in these ancient landscapes. You will leave behind the vanished kingdoms and forgotten gardeners to reflect on something far more personal. What these remarkable gardens can still teach anyone willing to slow down, breathe deeply, and notice the quiet beauty growing all around them.
The evening breeze carries the scent of wild grasses across the old ruins as you quietly continue your walk. Behind you, broken walls fade into the soft golden light. Ahead, the path becomes less defined. There are no carved gateways now, no marble fountains, no royal pavilions. Only a narrow trail winding through gentle hills where flowers bloom without anyone arranging them. After spending so much time exploring the hidden gardens of ancient civilizations, you begin noticing something unexpected. The most important lesson was never hidden inside the grandest palace. It was growing quietly in every ordinary corner. One of the clearest historical facts is that many principles developed in ancient gardens, careful irrigation, seasonal planting, companion planting, shade management, and thoughtful landscape design, continued influencing later civilizations and still appear in modern gardening practices today. Good ideas rarely disappear, they simply grow new roots. You follow a small stream bordered by reeds and flowering plants. The water moves gently over smooth stones, creating the same peaceful sound you first heard many evenings ago beside the Nile. Different land, different century, the same quiet music. It reminds you that nature has always spoken in familiar ways. People changed, empires changed, languages changed. Flowing water remained wonderfully consistent. Historians still argue whether ancient gardens shaped people's philosophies about nature, or whether those philosophies inspired the gardens themselves. Perhaps the relationship worked both ways. Spend enough time beneath trees, eventually they begin teaching without saying a word. You pause beneath the broad branches of an old oak. Sunlight filters through thousands of gently moving leaves. Each one catches the breeze differently. No two shadows fall exactly alike, yet together they create something remarkably peaceful.
Modern life often encourages speed. Ancient gardens quietly encouraged attention. Notice the bird. Notice the flower. Notice the breeze. Notice yourself slowing down. It sounds simple, perhaps because it is. One quirky historical tidbit comes from Roman writers who occasionally complained that some wealthy citizens became almost obsessed with collecting rare plants from distant lands, treating unusual flowers much the way modern people sometimes collect exotic gadgets or luxury items. Apparently, humans have always enjoyed saying, "Oh, this little plant? It came from very, very far away." The gardener next door was probably deeply impressed or wonderfully skeptical. The path leads toward a small orchard growing beside a hillside. No servants tend these trees. No elaborate irrigation channels feed their roots. Yet they flourish. Wild bees visit their blossoms. Birds carry seeds farther into the countryside. Nature continues gardening without asking permission. Children from a nearby village wander through the orchard, carrying simple woven baskets. They gather fallen apples while laughing over a game whose rules appear to change every few minutes. One proudly discovers an unusually shaped pear. Another insists it resembles a duck. Everyone agrees, mostly because disagreeing would delay snack time. You smile. Thousands of years separate these children from those you watched chasing butterflies in Egypt or floating toy boats in Roman fountains. Yet they feel strangely familiar. Curiosity has not changed very much. Neither has laughter. Farther ahead, an elderly woman kneels beside a patch of herbs growing outside her cottage. She clips a few sprigs of rosemary, some mint, a handful of thyme. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. The same knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation. Gardens remember, even when books disappear. The breeze grows cooler as afternoon slowly drifts toward evening. Birdsong softens. Golden light settles across the fields. You find yourself thinking back through everything you've seen. The sacred lotus floating peacefully upon Egyptian pools, the perfectly balanced Persian paradise gardens, the patient canals nourishing Mesopotamian orchards, the thoughtful Greek groves, the elegant Roman courtyards, the hidden meanings tucked inside flowers, the gardeners rising before dawn, the bees, the butterflies, the myths whispered beneath ancient trees, the archaeologists patiently uncovering forgotten pathways, the ruins where nature quietly reclaimed what people left behind. Every stop along your journey has gently repeated the same lesson. Beauty requires attention, not perfection. Attention. A flower blooms because someone planted it, or because nature did. Either way, someone eventually notices, and that noticing matters. You reach the top of a gentle hill overlooking a wide valley. Scattered trees cast long shadows across green fields. A winding river catches the evening sunlight like polished silver. The view is simple. No palace, no temple, no elaborate fountains. Yet it feels every bit as beautiful as the grandest royal garden. Perhaps beauty was never reserved for kings. Perhaps they simply built walls around what everyone else could already find. The first evening star appears overhead, then another. The sky slowly deepens into rich shades of blue. You take one long, peaceful breath. Tomorrow, your journey through the hidden world of ancient gardens will come to its quiet conclusion. One final walk awaits. The sun will set. The gardens will grow still. And everything you've discovered, from the smallest herb to the grandest paradise, will gently come together beneath a sky filled with stars.
The final evening arrives almost unnoticed. There is no grand announcement,
No royal procession, no great ceremony waiting beyond the next gate. Instead, the light simply begins to soften. The shadows beneath the trees grow a little longer, the breeze becomes cooler, and somewhere nearby, a blackbird offers the last cheerful notes of the day before settling into the branches for the night. You follow one last garden path. It is neither the grandest nor the oldest you have visited. In many ways, it is wonderfully ordinary. A few flowering shrubs line the walkway. An old olive tree leans comfortably toward a small reflecting pool. Lavender borders the path, releasing its familiar fragrance each time the evening breeze passes through. The water is perfectly still. The garden seems content simply to exist. One of the most enduring historical facts is that ancient gardens influenced landscape design for centuries afterward. Ideas such as enclosed green spaces, ornamental pools, shaded walkways, carefully planned orchards, and symbolic planting spread across cultures and continue to inspire parks, botanical gardens, and private gardens today. The ancient gardeners are gone. Their ideas are not. You stroll slowly beside the reflecting pool. Its surface mirrors the sky with remarkable clarity. Clouds drift overhead, birds pass across the reflection. Then the first evening star quietly appears. For a moment, the pool seems to contain another universe beneath your feet. Historians still argue whether humanity's earliest gardens were created primarily to control nature or to live more peacefully alongside it. After everything you have seen, the answer feels wonderfully balanced. Ancient gardeners shaped the land, but they also listened to it. They guided water, they planted trees, they welcomed birds, they worked with the seasons rather than against them. Perhaps the greatest gardens were partnerships, not victories. Nearby, a gardener finishes watering the final row of herbs before placing his clay jar beside a low stone wall. He pauses for a moment, not because another task awaits, because the day is complete. He simply looks across the garden he has cared for. No applause follows, no audience gathers, yet quiet satisfaction settles across his face. Some accomplishments never need witnesses. One quirky historical tidbit reminds you that many ancient gardeners saved seeds from the healthiest plants year after year, gradually improving future harvests through careful observation long before anyone understood genetics. Their classrooms were seasons, their textbooks were gardens, their examinations arrived every spring. The breeze carries the scent of rosemary, jasmine, and fresh earth. You smile as memories return one after another. The lotus ponds of Egypt, the flowing channels of Persia, the orchards of Mesopotamia, the sacred groves of Greece, the elegant villas of Rome, the hidden herb gardens, the evening banquets, the myths beneath ancient oaks, the patient archaeologists uncovering forgotten pathways, the ruins slowly embraced by wildflowers. Each memory feels like another flower added gently to a growing bouquet. You realize something quietly remarkable. Although every civilization designed its gardens differently, they all searched for similar things: shade, water, beauty, food, peace, hope, connection. None of those desires have disappeared. Modern parks filled with children, community gardens tucked between city streets, small balconies crowded with herbs, even a single flower pot resting on a sunny windowsill carries a tiny echo of these ancient traditions. People still plant because planting quietly expresses faith in tomorrow. A robin lands beside the path. It hops confidently through the grass before discovering something interesting beneath a fallen leaf. Dinner, apparently. The robin departs looking rather pleased with itself. Nature continues its routines whether anyone watches or not. Perhaps that consistency comforts us more than we realize. The sun slips lower. Golden light washes gently across every tree, every flower, every blade of grass. The reflecting pool changes from silver to amber, then to soft rose, then gradually to deep blue. The garden never truly becomes less beautiful, only different. You reach the old olive tree one final time. Its twisted trunk glows warmly in the fading light. You rest your hand gently against the rough bark. The tree has witnessed countless sunsets. This is only one more, yet somehow it still feels special. You sit quietly upon the familiar stone bench nearby. Nothing demands your attention. No lessons remain unfinished. No mysteries require solving. Only stillness. The first stars brighten overhead. Crickets begin their evening chorus. Somewhere beyond the trees, water continues its endless conversation with stone. The hidden world of ancient gardens slowly fades into the night. Yet it does not disappear. It lingers in every peaceful path, every flowering tree, every carefully tended garden, every moment when someone pauses to notice beauty instead of rushing past it. The evening grows wonderfully quiet now. The breeze slows until it barely stirs the lavender beside your feet, carrying only the faintest fragrance through the cooling air. The last colors of sunset melt gently into deep blue, and one by one, the stars quietly claim the sky above the sleeping garden. The reflecting pool becomes almost perfectly still, holding the moon like a polished mirror that has waited thousands of years for this peaceful moment. You take one final slow breath, filling your lungs with cool night air scented by herbs, blossoms, and fresh earth. Somewhere nearby, a single owl calls softly before the silence returns, gentle and welcoming rather than empty. The old olive tree stands patiently beside you, just as it has through countless seasons, asking nothing except that you notice its quiet strength. Perhaps that has always been the greatest gift of ancient gardens. They remind you that beauty rarely shouts. It grows patiently, leaf by leaf, season by season, asking only for a little care and a little attention. Long after kings, kingdoms, and stone walls have faded into history, a flower still opens toward the morning sun. Birds still greet the dawn, and rivers still carry fresh water through the land. As your thoughts become lighter, imagine leaving the garden gate open behind you, not because anything needs guarding, but because these peaceful places never truly belong to one person. Their calm travels with anyone willing to slow down enough to receive it. May the gentle rustle of leaves, the quiet whisper of fountains, and the fragrance of blossoms stay with you long after tonight's journey ends. Let the ancient pathways fade softly into the darkness, knowing they will always be waiting whenever your imagination wishes to wander again.